Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Wednesday, July the 9th. And welcome to our commentary. Well, there's a big story. I just saw this in the last hour that President Trump sent Brazil a letter with a 50% tariff. And I also read in the last hour that Argentina and the United States have cut a trade deal. Basically, 80% of whatever we do between the two countries is going to be tariff free. So that's a pretty big story. Of course, Brazil is the eighth largest economy in the world, and exactly how much business we do with Brazil, I don't know, but I'm sure it's quite substantial. I'm sure that we buy a lot of stuff from Brazil, and they buy a lot of stuff from us. I've never gotten into the details of the trade with Brazil, but it's got to be pretty substantial. I know they do a lot of business with Europe and China as well. So anyway, my guess is that the deal with Brazil is probably going to be redone, or at least relooked at or reviewed. I don't think we're going to end up with a 50% tariff, but that's where we are right now. And probably the reason that we are at that 50% threshold is because Brazil, for whatever reason, didn't respond before, or we couldn't negotiate a deal with them before. My guess is that's why they're getting a 50% letter. It's part of these countries who are simply getting a letter saying, hey, here's the deal. And if you're interested, we can talk about it later. My guess is that Brazil is going to be, if they're not already on the phone with the White House, looking to renegotiate that deal. But the one with Argentina, that is really great. That's really the direction we need to be going. The direction that we're taking with Argentina, where we do more and more business without tariffs, that's the direction that we need to be going. And certainly, I hope we can work that out with Canada as well, because I really believe that's the direction. That's the direction that we need to be going, doing away with tariffs and simply doing commerce, but doing it in a way that is fair to American consumers and American businesses at the same time. So we'll see how it all works out. Well, I have a post over at the American Thinker today talking about this situation with former Director Comey and former CIA director, or at least intelligence director. I'm not sure which job he had with President Obama. And we're talking about John Brennan now. Now, both of these men are involved, or allegedly involved, in the so-called Russia hoax. You may remember that was back in 2017, when the country was really paralyzed for a couple of years. Certainly, the Trump presidency was impacted for a couple of years with all these investigations that ended up being basically nothing. There was nothing there, absolutely nothing that we found out. What we did find out was that there was really a document that was used in the FISA court, I guess, to get information and to go after Trump. That document ended up being a document prepared by the Clinton campaign. So that was an ugly shot at President Trump, but it paralyzed the country. If you remember, the investigation and all the stuff that was going on, and, all the stories in the media about this and this and this and that, all of it turned out to be false. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing to that investigation. Well, Director Comey and Mr. Brennan are now under the microscope. And, I'm not sure where this is going to end up. I also don't know, and I have a post today talking about this. We don't really know either how much was President Obama involved in this thing. In my post today, I make reference to a story by Margaret Cleveland indicating, and she writes for the Federalist, indicating that Obama may have known about this, may have been involved in this whole thing. And again, these are allegations, but they would be very serious allegations. But I do believe that we have to get to the bottom of how something like a document that was basically a political document ended up, paralyzing an administration for a couple of years and doing a tremendous amount of harm, really, I think, to the Trump administration while these investigations were going on in Congress. And I'm sure you remember, I remember going on TV talking about the president under investigation and being interviewed about this. And the whole thing turned out to be a farce. There was nothing. So I do think the country deserves an explanation of how Director Comey and how Mr. Brennan, what role did they play in this, and how much did they, drive this thing through the media and friendly reporters who ended up reporting this. I think the country needs an explanation on that. Now, whether any laws were broken or, I don't know about that. I think that's too premature right now. But something bad did happen, that it shouldn't happen again. I think that's the key to me. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes. As I understand, the FBI is looking into it. We'll see what they find. We'll see what they find. One of the criticisms that I always had of Director Comey was going back to the Hillary Clinton investigation of those documents and the computer. Remember when Hillary Clinton had a computer and she was basically using a private server to do the business of the Secretary of State? I always felt that that was not treated seriously by Director Comey. When he said he came out and for like 20 minutes, he outlined all the crimes she had committed and then came to the conclusion that no prosecutor would take the case. Well, I don't know how in the world he came to that conclusion. First of all, that's not up to the director of the FBI. That would have been up to the Attorney General or the President of the United States. But apparently they didn't want to do anything about it either. So I do think that there were some fishy things going on here with Comey and with Brennan. Remember, the operation, whatever it was called, the Operation Hurricane, that was being used within the FBI to go after the Trump campaign, Crossfire Hurricane. That operation. I think all that stuff has put it out, because what in the world was going on during all that time, and how all of that investigation and all those attacks on President Trump, which I think hurt the Trump presidency, but they hurt the country more because they divided the country incredibly. And so I think we need to know what was going on during all of that and who was behind it and who was pushing it forward. I think we need to know what was going on with that. So I'm glad to see that Director Comey and Mr. Brennan at least are going to have to explain what was going on in an FBI investigation. We'll see where it goes. But this is probably going to take a while. But I'm glad to see that this is going in that direction. I have a post coming out tomorrow about what is happening in LA, where LA once again is protesting about the ICE going into basically MacArthur Park in LA. For those of you who may not be familiar with MacArthur Park, it's a park in LA that has been there for a long time. People who I've talked to about MacArthur Park, people who've lived in LA all their lives, who remember MacArthur Park in the 50s and 60s, remember a pretty nice place where people used to go and, walk in the park, that kind of thing. In fact, remember that song, MacArthur Park, that came out in the late 60s, and then it was reissued in the late 70s by Donna Summer. MacArthur Park used to be a place of romance and people having a nice time. That's not the case right now. That's not the case right now. MacArthur Park right now is, at least ICE is suspecting, that it is a place of crime and drug dealing and lots of things going on that shouldn't be going on. And the city of LA is blocking this. They're not going to be able to block it because ICE is going in with or without the support of the mayor, because they're going in, period. But you would think that the mayor would be more interested in cleaning up MacArthur Park than in getting into another fight with President Trump. I mean, you would think that. You would think that the mayor of LA would be concerned about the safety and, issues related to crime, more interested in that than in fighting with President Trump. But unfortunately, that's not the case. They're obsessed again with President Trump. They want to fight President Trump, and they're not going to stop him because, as I said before, ICE is going in with or without the support of the mayor of LA. They're going in, and they're already going in, and I'm sure they're coming back for more. But you would think that the city of LA and some of these sanctuary cities would be more interested in helping or working with ICE to eliminate some of this crime. You would think that, because who are the victims of this crime? The people who live there. So you would think they'd be interested in that, but apparently not. The mayor of LA is more interested in having fights in the media with Trump. Well, that's not going to work. Not going to work because, as Trump has already indicated, we're going in. And we'll go in as many times as we have to, and we'll use whatever force we have to use. And that's the right thing to do because the federal law is supreme over the state law. And sanctuary cities are illegal. We've been saying that for years. And now that we have a president who's enforcing immigration laws, finally, we are crashing through the gate and exposing what goes on in these sanctuary cities, the crime and unfortunately the criminals who are living there. I always ask the question of the Democrats don't like this. I always ask the question, exactly which one of the criminals that ICE captures would you like to see put back in the community? Because ICE is capturing criminals. They are, because they're targeting individual people. And you would think that the local police or the local government would work with ICE. That's what you think, but not here, not here. They want to fight with Trump. Well, they're not going to win their fight with Trump. I mean, it's as simple as that. They're not going to win this fight with President Trump. Well, one thing I wanted to say very quickly, we remembered today a fellow by the name of Ed Ames, who was born in 1927 on this day and died in 2023. And if you remember that show, Daniel Boone, remember that show? Daniel Boone with Fess Parker. He used to play the role of Daniel Boone, you know, the old frontier hero of the frontier. Well, Ed Ames was the fellow who played Mingo, who was his sidekick, his good friend on the show. And Ed Ames, as I said, was born on this day in 1927, passed away in 2023. One of my favorite, absolutely favorite television characters, Mingo. And of course, Daniel Boone, that was a great show growing up. I loved that show when I was growing up. When we first came to the United States in the mid-'60s, that was one of the shows, I think it was already on reruns by the time we got here, but that was one of the shows that we loved, Daniel Boone. I remember watching that show with my brother every single time that we could. So Ed Ames, born on this day in 1927, passed away in 2023. Good old Mingo. And one thing about Ed Ames, too, that I need to add here before we go, he became a very successful male vocalist, had a great voice. He had tremendous voice. The guy should have been in the opera. And he had several albums that he recorded, including that very famous song, My Cup Runneth Over, that was a big, big hit many years ago. So we remember Ed Ames today. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.